Hello again, YouTube. Kevin here for Superpower Broadcasting. In this video, I'm going to be discussing Trump's initial go-ahead with a strike against targets in Iran, and then his almost immediate revocation of the authorization to strike Iran. Now, what's interesting here is that you really get the sense that when this occurred, that there was this sense of urgency, that there was this sense that the United States needed to respond to the shooting down of the drone. But then all of a sudden things just magically did a 180 and Trump revoked the order. And of course he regarded it as, oh, it showed his decisiveness. What an absolute absurdity. To initially give the go-ahead and then revoke it 10 minutes later, that is not decisive. That demonstrates incompetence. It demonstrates childishness. It demonstrates indecision. And it ultimately is characteristic of a weak leader, which he is, of course. And we know this because, putting all of his own individual characteristics aside, he's subservient to the Kremlin. He's subservient to the people he owes money to. He ain't got $10 billion. I'd be willing to wager he's got a negative net worth. And much of that money is owed to Russian oligarchs that are cozy with KGB Vlad. And so he's also pretty stupid. And I made a meme basically on my meme page. I made a fake Trump tweet saying, so I was going to attack Iran, but then Putin called me and let me know how Iran and Russia are partners, and then I changed my mind about it. And who knew that Russia and Iran were friends? Who knew international relations was this complicated? That's basically the meme that I made from a meme page. The thing is, that's almost the exact sense of what actually happened. Like, there's a chance that Vladimir Putin did get on the phone with him and say, hey, Donnie, I don't know if you know this because you're pretty stupid and you didn't know that Venezuela was our ally, but Iran's our ally too, so cut out the crap and let them do whatever they want. That's the sense that you really got from it. Because it makes no sense otherwise. It seemed like he was going to give the go-ahead. It seemed like he was actually, for once, going to step outside of his little libertarian Ron Pollard type isolationist bubble and actually stand up for America and actually stand up for American interests abroad. But instead, he immediately backs down. And then, of course, he follows it up by saying that, well, it was an unmanned drone and it was only worth $130 million. And the generals informed me that if we struck Iran, that up to 150 people would have died. And I didn't believe that it was proportionate that 150 people died when 0 people died in the drone attack. And of course, I look at that and I'm like, Donnie, were you an idiot? I mean, come on. I mean, even if there's no Kremlin collusion, which we know they wired, they lent him the loans. His own son admitted they got the loans from Russia for the golf courses. We know he got money laundering and financing through the Russians. We know that. But let's just put that aside for a minute and just assume that there wasn't a Kremlin conflict of interest. Really? You're the president of the United States? And you're going to have one of your military assets attacked, shot down, and then say, yeah, but we're not going to do anything about it because nobody died in the attack. Like, so by that logic, Iran could, theoretically, let's just say it is a thought experiment, they wipe out the entire power grid and all the infrastructure in the United States. But they don't kill anybody in the process. But now there's no more highways and now there's no more power plants, let's just say, for example. So we're basically living in the Stone Age or whatever. But nobody died in the actual attacks. It's okay. They managed to evacuate everybody from everywhere that they were going to blow up, and then they destroyed the power plants and the highways. So it's okay. They didn't kill anybody. They just destroyed our economy. Like, let's just say that happened, for example, Donald Trump comes out and says, yeah, but the counterstrike would have killed 150 people, and they didn't kill anybody in the attack against us, so yeah, I'm a strong leader, I'm not going to do anything. That's basically what he would do. And I'm like, there's 2 points about this. The first one is the issue of casualties. If you start a war, and you do an act of war against a country like the United States of America, even if you don't happen to kill anybody in the strike, that doesn't mean that you didn't commit an act of war. So, for example, Russia, they didn't kill anybody when they hacked into the voting registries in the United States in 2016. They didn't kill anybody when they supported Donald Trump. And Putin, of course, in Helsinki even admitted that he supported Donald Trump. He just admitted it and he laughed about it. Just like how he initially denied invading Crimea, and then after it was fully annexed, he came out and said, yeah, it was us. What are you going to do about it? Because he knows that NATO and the West right now are run by a bunch of isolationists who aren't going to do anything. They might even sing his praise because they're full of dictator apologists. And so when it comes down to this, the argument about the casualties is so weak. I mean, imagine that Japan had attacked America on Pearl Harbor and hit all those ships and sunk the ships that they did, but it turned out that all the sailors were away and nobody actually died in the attacks. We just lost the ships in the attacks. Just the war material, the several $1 billion worth of ships. Let's just say that happened. But nobody died. Nobody died or was injured. Let's just say that happened. Really, is FDR going to be like, yeah, you guys didn't actually kill anybody, so it's cool. It's cool. You guys keep on doing your Japanese empire stuff. You guys keep on going for oil in Indonesia. You guys just keep on fashioning on your own. You guys keep doing it. Like, really, I mean, I got a lot of disagreements with FDR. I mean, he is basically writing beautiful love letters to Joseph Stalin the same way that Donald Trump writes beautiful love letters to Chairman Kim. I mean, he was an absolute communist fanboy. I got a lot of issues with FDR, right? But even FDR probably would have retaliated for that. He probably still would have done the war. He probably still would have said, yeah, that's a bridge too far. You guys sunk a bunch of our ships in a surprise attack. Yeah, you woke up the American tiger. He probably would have said that. And I disagree with that guy on a lot of stuff. And even then, he probably would have stood up for America. But Donald Trump, I mean, he's so weak. He's so pathetic. He's so incompetent and he's so isolationist that these arguments would work on him. He'd say, oh yeah, you guys didn't actually kill anybody. You just sunk a bunch of our ships. So it's cool. You guys keep making Japan great again. You guys keep on killing the Chinese and keep on killing everybody else in Asia. And, you build up your empire. That's literally what he would say, right? I mean, it's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. And so that's the first point about the casualties, which is that, no, it's an act of war. Whether you kill 0 people or you kill 1,000 people or you kill 1 million people, if you do an act of war, you deserve retaliation, 100%. And even though I think the Ron Paulers are goofy and disgraceful and isolationist and egregious, even a lot of the libertarians, even the most isolationist libertarians, still believe in the right to self-defense if attacked. In other words, they'll do all their apologia for Putin, right? And they'll defend Assad. But if Putin did a full-scale invasion of the United States, most of the libertarians, or at least a sizable percentage of the libertarians, would say we should fight back against the Russians. Even the most crazy isolationists, even those guys, they still believe in the right to self-defense. But Donald Trump, apparently, he doesn't believe in the right to self-defense. He doesn't believe that the U.S. should respond if attacked. I mean, what a weak commander-in-chief. What an anti-commander-in-chief. What a commander in clown uniform. I mean, what an absolute joke. And so it gets worse, of course, because he also argued in there not just about the casualties, but about the proportionality of the response. Now, I don't know where this began. I know the first time I heard about the argument about proportional retaliation was when I was in grade 12 and I was taking history. And I was the only kid in my class that defended Israel over Hamas and Palestine. And I argued, well, Israel should have a right to retaliate if Hamas fires rockets into them, because if somebody attacks you, you have the right to retaliate, and they don't get to say uncle if they start the war. In other words, if you start a war, you don't get to decide when the war ends. If you lose, your opponent gets to decide when it ends. So my history teacher took issue with this and said that the problem with Israel is that they don't respond proportionately. So if Hamas fires a couple rockets in, they bomb a bunch of Hamas positions. That's basically the argument that he was making. And they do it with overwhelming firepower, whereas Hamas doesn't have, they have underwhelming firepower. That's the point that he was making. And I'm thinking about this, I'm like, but Israel doesn't even have these crappy 1940s Katyusha rockets lying around. Like, if they wanted to do a fully proportional retaliation, they literally have to send the IDF to the black market somewhere, take months to acquire a bunch of old school Soviet rockets, and then fire those back. And probably hit a school or something because they have no accuracy whatsoever. I'm like, yeah, Israel has bigger firepower, but they're also more precise and they're able to do a lot more damage while minimizing collateral damage. It might not be proportionate, but if you don't want a proportionate, like, if you want a proportionate response, don't start the war, because then you'll get a proportionate response. If you start the war, you don't get to complain if the enemy all of a sudden responds massively. In fact, massive retaliation used to be regarded as one of the fundamental pillars of peace in the world. In other words, if there's the credible threat that if I do even a small attack against the enemy, that the enemy will overwhelmingly wipe me out, then I might not do that small attack. Whereas if I know that the enemy will respond with a small attack, if I do a small attack, then I can cost-benefit analysis it, and maybe in this one particular case, I can get a small victory out of attacking even a superpower. And so it lends itself to these regimes doing these cost-benefit analyses with human lives, with warfare, when war should not be conducted like that. War is serious. War is hell. We cannot make war something that these regimes feel comfortable nonchalantly deciding to do now, and then say, uncle 2 days later, and then we honor that, and then they attack us again in 6 weeks, and then we have to respond proportionately, and tit for tat. No, if you do a strike against us, we will totally annihilate you, and you don't get to complain about it. So for example, Japan is a great example of this. Harry Truman the Based was the one who finished the war, and what did he do? He dropped nuclear weapons on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he dropped them on the military munitions plants in those cities. And of course, a lot of people were killed in those attacks. A lot of civilians, a lot of innocent civilians, right? Here's the problem, of course, with that narrative. One, way more innocent civilians were killed in one night's raid on Tokyo, about 500,000, than were killed in not just the nuclear attacks, but the radiation for decades after at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So way more people were dying anyway. So it's cute to point to the attacks in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and say, oh, USA evil, right? Well, no, actually a lot more people died in other conventional attacks. Those were actually a very swift way to end the war, because they had that symbolic might to them that the firebombing on Tokyo didn't really have, even though way more people died. But two, on the morality of it, Japan started the war. So if the emperor starts the war, and then the emperor gets totally curb stomped, does the emperor then get to say, oh, no, you can't do that. That's too tough. We only killed 5,000 people at Pearl Harbor. You're killing all of our people. You can't do that. Well, guess what? The emperor doesn't get any say at that point, because there's no international body to appeal to. If you start a war and you wind up losing it, guess what? You're going to lose, because the world is anarchic, so don't start the war in the first place if you don't like the consequences of it. That used to be common sense, right? And of course, the emperor, of course, got very lucky because the United States decided to keep him alive. Now, I think that's insane. I mean, imagine if Hitler didn't kill himself and we just say, oh yeah, Hitler gets to be the honorary chancellor of Germany until 1994, until he dies. That's insanity. They should have hung Hitler. They should have fire squatted Hitler immediately if he had been captured alive, right? But they didn't do that to the emperor. They were gracious and generous to the emperor of Japan, who started all this carnage, and he killed about 20 million people in Asia, about 400,000 Americans, but many times more Chinese. I mean, just absolutely ruined and destroyed Korea and China, right? Not to mention other countries in Asia, in his bloodlust for oil and glory and resources, right? Just as imperialistic as it gets. And the United States decided to still play nice with him. But yet the U.S. is the bad guys, apparently. I mean, it's just a disgrace. But when it comes down to all this idea of proportionality, of a proportionate response, it makes no logical sense at all. It is, I mean, it's just anti-logic. Because if the enemy knows that you won't respond massively, there's no incentive for the enemy not to do a small-scale attack if they think it's in their benefit at that moment. I mean, tactical skirmishes, one day, the next day, the next day, the next day, the next day. It is a recipe for perpetual, constant flare-ups and war, as opposed to a massive retaliation, get it done, get it over with, and then have perpetual peace. Like, I love peace, right? But I'm not going to sit around like these Tinky Tulsi fanboys, these Ron Paulers, and pretend that we can just play nice with the enemy and appease them and ignore when they act up, and that everything's going to be A-okay. Because guess what? As long as these dictatorships exist, there is a fundamental disagreement and there is a fundamental rupture in the moral fabric of the world. And we must end them. Because if we don't end them, they will amass enough strategic firepower on their end that when they start the war on their terms, we may lose. So this is a matter of national interest. It's a matter of security. It's a matter of morality, because human rights, of course, matter just as much here as they do for brown Iranians. I mean, let's just keep it real. A lot of this comes down to racism, too. A lot of the isolationists are the way they are because they believe in white power, and they believe that whites are the only people that matter. And a lot of the progressives as well embrace the human rights for whites, to hell with everyone else. Now, they might not be overtly racist, but the ideology, the foreign policy that they support is 100% racist, because it says cosmopolitanism for us, liberalism for us, and dictatorship and tyranny and rape and gulags for you, if you happen to be brown or black, basically. That's the way that works. It's disgusting. It's repugnant. They do not view North Koreans and Iranians and Syrians as having the same rights as us, as whites in the West, basically. And they call themselves progressive because it's so progressive to condemn swaths of the human race to perpetual tyranny and perpetual gulags and no hope. I mean, what an absolute disgrace, right? But getting back to this proportionality thing, it is an absolute joke. It's comical because at the end of the day, the matter of proportionality is up to the one who retaliates. It's not some law. It's not some rule that has to be abided by, where if you're attacked, you can only respond in a proportionate manner. If Iran shoots down a drone, or if Hamas fires rockets at Israel, it is the prerogative of Israel to respond however they want. If they want to respond by firing 8,000 rockets and destroying all of Hamas's positions, decapitating their leadership, going in with boots on the ground, rounding up every Hamas agent, lining them up against the wall and shooting them, they have the right to do that because Hamas attacked them in the first place. And I would argue that way fewer people would die in that, because then we could liberate Gaza and incorporate them into Israel and give everybody equal citizenship rights. Of course, Netanyahu won't do that because he is a racial chauvinist and an isolationist and a clown and an ultra-conservative who basically has the same mindset as Patrick Buchanan, right? Or Ron Paul. Even still, he'll still respond if attacked, but it's not like he has a moral concern for anybody. But, I mean, with a liberal hawk, right, or with a neoconservative in the White House, you wouldn't see this BS about proportionality. There wouldn't be these patty cakes with the status quo in the world with, oh, we need to be nice with the dictators. We need to honor and respect them. It would be, no, you're an enemy of America. You're getting what's coming to you, right? And so in this case, it's even worse than that, because not only does Iran disregard human rights and torture and do all the political repressions. But the Ayatollah then has the gall to attack a U.S. drone and then get away with it. And you know, the most egregious part about all this at this point is just these useful idiots in the West, the isolationists, the Tanky Tulsi fanboys, the Ron Paulers, the Jesse Ventura types, the neckbeard Jimmy Dore neckbeards, the Kyle Useful Idiot Kulinski fanboys, the Abby Martin fanboys, the Vladimir Putin bootlickers, the Assad worshippers, the Kim Il-sungists, the Joseph Stalin apologists, the Tankies, etc. All these people in the West who say, yeah, Iran didn't do nothing wrong. They didn't do nothing wrong. They're totally innocent. They're 100% innocent. They sure, they may have shot down a drone, but why did the U.S. move their drone? Like, you see these memes, right, where they say, oh, why did Iran move its country near U.S. bases? As if they would rather have Iran control the world than the United States. Like, because U.S. interests and human interests are way more closely aligned than the Ayatollah's interests and human interests. Because his interests are oil, glory, repression, patriarchy, tyranny, theocracy, ultra-conservatism, and gulags, basically, for everybody that disagrees with him, or bullets, right? Whereas with America, what's America about? Individual liberty, capitalism, liberalism, human rights, human dignity, rule of law, accountable government, etc. Guess what? Humans tend to prosper under capitalism, liberalism, human rights, individual dignity, rule of law. So America's a lot more closely aligned with human interests than Iran happens to be. And so the third aspect of this, of course, is that whether or not Iran started it, which they did here, but whether or not they did, is irrelevant. Because even if they were, quote-unquote, minding their own business, they forfeited their sovereignty. The only way that you could see Iran as being a sovereign state is if you have a massive Westphalia fetish like Tulsi Gabbard or Vladimir Putin or Bashar Assad. That's the only way that you could conceive of that. If you're a liberal hawk such as myself, they have no sovereignty. They deserve to be liberated right now and the Ayatollah rung up and given trial and promptly executed. That's how this should go. And when it comes down to all of this, it does not matter. It absolutely does not matter who started what. Because the only way that has any logical credence is if you believe in absolute Westphalian sovereignty, where they can do whatever they want to their people, and we're totally fine with that, as opposed to viewing them as not having any legitimate sovereignty in the first place. Because, like, let's say, for example, they didn't shoot down the drone. Should we all of a sudden not take out the Iranian dictatorship? Because that's what these isolationists would argue. Because North Korea never shot down a U.S. drone right now, at least. Sure, they sunk a South Korean vessel about a decade ago. They've constantly acted up. But, like, let's just say that they didn't. Let's just say that the only people they killed were their own people. Let's just say that they only killed 5 million of their own people so that Kim could have his Mercedes and his mansions and his wine and his Swiss cheese. And they never attacked the U.S. They never attacked South Korea. They never did any provocations outside. Should we let them continue to do that for 10 million years, as they say, the 10 million year bloodline of Mount Baekdu? Should we just accept and tolerate their Juche dictatorship? No. No, because they have no sovereignty. They have no authority. They have no legitimacy to rule. Because once you violate the human rights and once you forfeit, like once you do that, once you round up and establish a dictatorship and round up your political opponents and execute them and send their families to concentration camps for 3 generations, it doesn't matter whether or not you attack the U.S. or South Korea, because you're already an enemy of the U.S. and South Korea. You're an enemy of liberal values. You're an enemy of humanity. And it is the duty of NATO and the West, in this case, to destroy you. And that is absolutely what should happen here with Iran. The fact that Iran still exists, the fact that the Ayatollah is still in charge over there, like a week after shooting down that drone, is a disgrace. And if Hillary Clinton won the U.S. presidency in 2016, this would not have happened. And it's not a party thing if Mitt Romney had won the U.S. presidency in 2012. and gotten reelected in 2016, the Ayatollah would be dead right now. If John McCain had won in 2008, he would have taken out Iran when those protests flared up. I mean, it goes on and on. It's not a Democrat versus Republican thing. There are Republicans who understand this. There are Democrats who understand this. There are hawks in the Democratic Party. There are hawks in the Republican Party. Unfortunately, we have an isolationist who owes a ton of money, possibly upwards of $1 billion, to a bunch of corrupt Russian oligarchs who love the Ayatollah, love Iran, and told him to stand down. And good boy Donnie, yes sir, Vladimir Trump, acted like a good boy and stood down. And anybody who calls him the commander-in-chief at this point, he's not the commander-in-chief, he's the anti-commander-in-chief. He's the commander-in-clown. He's the subservient puppet in chief, who obeys everything that Vladimir Putin tells him to at this point. And of course Putin knows he can get away with it. He admitted that he supported Donald Trump. And I mean, Putin's a smart guy. He knew that nothing would come of it. Nothing has come of it. Because the West is weak right now. Because we've allowed these isolationists and these populists to overrun our democracy and overrun our values and ultimately forfeit everything that we stand for. And they're trying to destroy the liberal order that's 70 years in the works. And the entire project of everything that the great Democratic leaders such as Harry Truman the Based, Ronald Reagan, John F. Kennedy, Winston Churchill, etc., worked to construct. And it is anathema to everything that we should stand for. It's a disgrace. It is an absolute travesty. And to see this happen, I mean, this is the guy who says he's going to make America great again. This is the guy who stole Ronald Reagan's slogan. If Ronald Reagan were president and that happened, he would have bombed the crap out of Iran. It would have been 150 casualties. It would have been the entire leadership. It would have been overwhelming, shock and awe. It would have been full air campaign, possibly ground-based invasion, naval assets deployed. It would have been, not just one fleet, not just one carrier battle group. He might have had 2 or 3 carrier battle groups in there. He would have destroyed the Iranian capacity to wage war. And he would have taken out their affiliates, their terrorists, the terrorists that they sponsor. He would have taken out the RRGC. He would have taken out the Quds Force. He would have taken out Hezbollah. He would have taken out Assad if they acted on behalf of them. He would have just paved a road of firepower from the Mediterranean Sea to the Caspian Sea and liberated these places. Instead, we have Donnie Sir Vladimir Trump. What a joke. What a clown. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And it is just such a disgrace and so disappointing to see the American president just surrender. I mean, what is the most powerful military in human history and say, yeah, we're not going to use it. You guys didn't do anything wrong. Putin likes you guys, so you guys are cool. That's literally what it is. I mean, I argue that U.S. military spending should increase a lot. It used to be 8% under Ronald Reagan. Now it's barely cracked 2% under Donald Trump. Of GDP, of course. 2% of GDP. So the U.S. is hardly spending anything on the military right now. But even if Trump spent 8% of GDP on the military, he's not going to use it. So what good does it do? And I'm not saying go to war with every country in the world, of course, right? I'm just saying that if you're not willing to use it when attacked, what's the point in even having a military at all at this point? I mean, and of course we know that he's a short-term populist fad. We have to have the military because once he's out and once we get liberal hawk or neoconservative in office, we need to have a defense apparatus still, of course. Like, I'm just partly being in jest here about this. But right now, as it stands right now, if the U.S. had a military or if they didn't, it makes no difference in this instance because the Iranians attacked the U.S. and the U.S. didn't respond. So right now, whether the U.S. spent just $130 million on that drone or if they spent the $700 billion a year as they do right now, you could not tell by their response. Because if you looked at this, you would either say, oh, well, they have nothing to fire back with, or they're choosing not to fire back. But either way, they didn't fire back. And it is unfortunate. It sets a bad precedent now. Everything that Donald Trump has done has set a bad precedent when it comes to foreign policy. These dictators are invigorated, right? They feel that the world is their oyster now, and the people, they can just send them to gulags, and the U.S. will do nothing about it. And they're right, because the U.S. is run by an absolute clown of the earth, dictator apologist, isolationist, loser, who owes a ton of money to a bunch of bankrollers in Russia that knew that they weren't going to make any money off of him because he's got 6 bankruptcies, because he's big debt Donnie, and they only lent him money to have compromise so that when the time came when he might be U.S. president and able to act and make serious decisions of war and peace, that he would be a good boy, and he would ultimately appease and give pardon to every dictator who ever lived. And it is a disgrace. It is repugnant. And I cannot wait to see him either removed from office or get voted out. And the only one who's worse at this point is Tanky Tulsi Gabbard. Anybody else who's announced running would be better at this point. Anybody from the 23 other Democrats, or if Amash runs, Weld, any of these people would be better. Anybody would be better at this point. But him, I mean, right now, you cannot tell a Donald Trump administration from a Tanky Tulsi Gabbard administration, because she would have done the exact same thing. And she's rightfully seen as a lunatic. But Donald Trump is seen as this legitimate mainstream, he's the champion of Republicanism. He's going to make America great again. If your definition of making America great again is letting the enemies of America walk all over them and not responding at all to it, I mean, yeah, I guess America looks pretty great. I guess, I'm pretty sick of winning right now, I mean, what a joke. So thanks for watching, YouTube.